Hello and welcome back to my channel. Now, this evening's video I would like to share with you a resource which I have created, and this is a watch serial catalog of all makers, Montandon watches, Montandon Frères, partnerships with a Montandon watchmaker, and this is a resource which includes watches from the late 18th century up until the early to mid 20th century. And this catalog contains over 500 watch objects. Now, there are some clocks in here. There are very few clocks. They are also cataloged with this for the overall perspective on these watchmakers. But we do have this situation with Swiss watches in general, specifically during the 19th century, that unlike the American watch companies that begin to really take off and thrive in the 1870s and 1880s, 1890s, etc. They were extremely well documented in their watch production, and any serial number can basically be located, and a date, a production number, amount of watches produced, etc., can be derived. However, with the Swiss makers, this luxury does not exist, and it was incumbent upon me to draft such a resource. So we do have this, and this is a list which this catalog is continually being updated and refined as new objects are discovered and cataloged. And so I've devoted several years, approximately 3 years, to building this list. And at the present, there are 511 objects, and would like to share some of this with you. And hopefully, this is of use to some people. This may be of interest to watch and art historians, auctioneer houses, or auction people, basically specialists in this line of horology, etc. Collectors will also be interested, and hobbyists. So this we do have, and this is as chronological as possible. But object number one, this is Yersin and Montandon, Paris coq-fusée, and we see this date of approximate fabrication 1778 to 1789, and this is the time that we know this partnership existed. And if we continue, we see these early Montandon makers, and these first several artists are in partnerships. We do have Olphin et Montandon à Clermont, and this is, now the first I should say, this is Jonas Louis Yersin and David Francois Montandon. Now, Olphin et Montandon, this is another partnership that was located in Clermont-Ferrand. They were also in the Lyon area. However, in Clermont, we have André Olphin and Balthazar Montandon. Now, Balthazar married the wife, or rather the daughter of André Olphin, and Olphin was the senior in this partnership. However, Montandon eventually took over this business, and Olphin's nephew was also involved to a certain extent after the death of Olphin. But let us continue. We do see some of these early watch and clock makers. We do have clock. Several of these are clocks in the beginning, as you can see, such as the Yersin and Montandon Allegory of Love and Allegory of Fidelity. And there is the Montandon clock. This is by Balthazar, signed at Clermont, which was Marbre Doré. And this was around 1799, 1800, something around in this area, certainly in this time frame. Now, it is interesting. We do have a very precocious watchmaker who immigrated with his family around the end of the Napoleonic Wars to the United States, and this is Julian Montandon, and we find him signing watches in New York. Now, these objects were quoted in the 1880s by watch experts, and I have not seen a live example of these watches. However, we do have historical data upon them. And this is an interesting watchmaker, Julian Montandon. He was working with presidents of the United States. He had approximately 4 presidents with whom he had some rapport, including business dealings. He was a frequent guest at the White House and demonstrated watches of his own fabrication to the president, John Quincy Adams. Now, he would also go to work with many of the departments of the burgeoning United States government, and this includes the Ordnance Department, that's artillery. Perhaps he was the very first American watchmaker to have created fundamentally a telemeter, this type of chronograph which could be used for calculating the distance of projectiles. And his watches were so repute. He was on Pennsylvania Avenue, quite close to the White House, but his watches were so highly praised in Washington that these were even used at the Washington racetrack to time the races. And so he was very interesting character, and we also find him working on scientific military projects with the departments, including experiments with an 8-inch mortar, experiments with gunpowder. He was working with the Naval Observatory and calculating and helping to record various precise scientific measurements in astronomical observations. And he also had several different types of thermometers, including in watch form, and he was selling these to the United States government. So very interesting character. As we move along, we see very early in the 19th century H.L. Montandon in Copenhagen. This is Henri Louis. He did move there and immigrated around 1814, 1815. Then he's almost immediately spent 5 years in Paris, probably training at either a partner or his relatives, after which he returned to Copenhagen and began fabricating as a master watchmaker. And we have many examples of his watches and clocks. So we continue on this catalog, and we can see it's very interesting that I have tried to preserve as much information here. I would like to point out that we do have the first row, we do have an approximate date. Now, sometimes we have historical information that enables us to anchor the date much more firmly. These tend to be estimates, but however, sometimes they can be very precise. And it is interesting in that the thing about serial numbers, and you will see that in the following rows, that serial numbers have a tendency, especially in the 19th century, in the early 19th century, of doubling as invoice numbers, so that a watch's serial number would have been replicated by the invoice when it was sold. The invoice number would be the same as the serial number. This is how they recorded and kept track of which watches were being produced and sold. So it was sold based on the serial number. So these generally tend to be chronological. And now it does depend upon the sorts and the number of suppliers that they had and type and quality of the watches. However, we do find this with Montandon affairs. This seems to be very sequential and very easily tracked, and this gives us a very good timing and dating ability with the help of these serializations and putting things in their place. But so I should continue with the, we do have what kind of the type of watch. This is either usually key wind and key set or a stem wind piece. Then I have the material, whether this be a gold or silver watch, and the content, 18 karat, etc. Then we have serial number itself. Sometimes this can be a composite serial number to include both a case serial number and a movement serial number. Oftentimes this can be the very same, one and the same. And this is specifically and especially true if the watchmaker was also a so-called monteur de boîte. So they were establishing watches with the case, and these tend to be the same. Now we also have the maker name and location, and this is generally how they're assigning the watches either on the dial or the movement or the dust cover, somewhere in the watch. And then the last column is more or less physical description characteristics. So, but let us continue. We have quite many pieces by Alphonse Montandon, Traverse, and this is in the Traverse Valley. This is more mountainous countryside area, and he is the only Montandon watchmaker signing at Traverse. So it's quite interesting. These are all Alphonse. And once again, with the lower serial number, these generally tend to be then the older the watch. The lower the serial number, we see with Alphonse, the older the watch is. Okay, so now we start getting into a period where there's more and more watchmakers, and this is still more or less chronological. So, but we have two different Louis Montandons, and one specifically, this one came earlier. This is Louis Montandon, who was signing Geneva, and he was about a generation before L. Montandon Locle, who was also signing. He was another Louis, but he was signing specifically only Locle and only as L. Montandon. So it does seem that these are two different makers, and I am most certain that Louis Montandon was a watchmaker in La Chaux-de-Fonds. This was Louis Auguste Montandon, and very interesting character and very wealthy, very well respected, and also had part in the provisional government in 1848 in Neuchâtel. And we even have his picture, which is very nice. Now, Alphonse, we do not have his picture. He ceased making the watches by 1866. Certainly by the fall of 1865, the village of Traverse experienced a fire and burnt to the ground approximately 95% of the village, and all of his watch equipment would have been destroyed. There were two fabricators in the city, and they were both, we see them both disappearing by the next Dablin Almanac recording. They are no longer there. There's only a watch factory that was making ebauches and other watch parts. So, but then we have Louis. This is Louis, probably Louis Frédéric Montandon, and he was in Le Brunet and Locle. First he was in Le Brunet, later in Locle. I should back up and mention that Louis Montandon very probably was also signing, as well as Geneva, La Chaux-de-Fonds. He was certainly located in that location, and this would have been, it was for a very specialized clientele if he was signing. This certainly would have been a less likely signing place than Locle, and this certainly denotes the fact that his physical presence was in La Chaux-de-Fonds, because Geneva and Locle were the two key cities which were the most famous and would have been a high praise to put on the watch that would have sold the watch. It would have spoken volumes to the client. So we see there are very many of these L. Montandon Locles, and they generally fall in this 1860 to 1880 period. And this is certainly the lifespan and production period for Louis Frédéric Montandon. Now, after this, we start to have we have Dubois et Montandon. Now, this partnership only signed Geneva, as far as we know. There are very few. This is a rare brand. This was probably somewhere in the mountainous areas, possibly in Fleury, the Traverse Valley, or even remotely Saint-Croix. And Geneva also remains a possibility, but this is not exactly clear at this point due to the very low frequency of these watches and the amount of data that is left behind. But we can make a very sensible guess at who was behind these watches because of the time period and by following Dablin almanacs. Now we will see a series of very high quality pieces, chronometers by Charles Adolphe Montandon, and these are also signed Locle. Now this was the chief managing director of Montandon Frères Locle. Now he had been previously in Paris. However, by 1850 he relocated to Lokla and opened up officially the chapter there, continued fabricating under Montandon Frères. Now, so we will see pieces simultaneously by Charles Adolphe Montandon and Montandon Frères Lokla. Now, these serializations are right in interspersed, and clearly this is a different quality. In the Mexican press, we do find articles denoting that watches signed Charles Adolphe Montandon were a so-called supreme class, or this is almost higher than first class watches, very high quality, very exclusive, niche, and extremely accurate timepieces. And many of these, as we can see on the right hand side, these were pocket chronometers that were placed in astronomical competitions, and these were winning accolades and awards in these competitions. Now we go into J. Montandon and Jules Montandon, and these watches are probably from two different makers. It does seem that these were two separate Jules Auguste Montandon, one in Lokla and the other was in Chaux-de-Fonds, I believe. So we do have these two individuals, and these are rare pieces. However, we have enough pieces to make a type of guesstimation as far as the person behind these, and this is based mainly on articles from the Swiss press, the Devoin Almanac Catalogue listings, and other genealogical information. And now we see Montandon Brothers. This was a single watch that is known. This is signed in London, but this is most certainly Montandon Frères Lokla was producing this, and the brother-in-law. This was an allied family member, opened a shop selling jewelry and watches in London. We know where it was located and when it was there, and this piece is signed with the address London 22 Percy Street. But this was a part of the Montandon Frères franchise, and this would have been Lokla, not Paris. Now, Montandon Frères Paris, after 1850, when Charles Adolphe and all the brothers returned to Lokla, the remaining cousins that were in Paris, they were devoted specifically and only to watch spring and clock spring manufacturing. Now, they did have a Montandon Frères franchise that were selling watches in Paris, and these would have been pieces produced in Lokla by Montandon Frères Lokla, and also production in Geneva and Besançon. Now, in these cases, these other fabricators were subcontracted to other parties. But this is the largest franchise of a Montandon watch fabricator, Montandon Frères. This is the elite of these makers. One may say the cream of the crop. They had a very long stay in businesses, on the order of 100 years, and this went through several generations of the family. The company actually traces its founding in 1790, and would eventually cease to exist by the pre-World War I era. But the Lokla branch did close in 1888, and the founder, the last founding manager, I should say, Charles Albert Montandon, he liquidated and moved to the Antilles, the Caribbean, and established a cocoa plantation, the largest in the Caribbean, with 100,000 cocoa plants. It was a very fascinating story. Now, we see these serializations and the dates, and many of these dates are quite specific. We have this 1857 to 1858. These were watches that were at the Bern Expo, and this gives us a very high degree of certainty as far as the serializations that we find here. But we're also able to gauge these other watches based on competitions or other specific criterions, and in some cases patents. So this will give us a lot of specific information. We see that this is a huge volume of watches, and then we continue with these other watches. Now, you will notice that there are gray cells, such as we see Samuel Henry Montandon at Le Pont. Now, we do not know how these watches were signed, whether this was H. Montandon Locle or Le Pont, or Henri Montandon Le Pont, or Geneva of some kind. We know of only 3 of his watches that were in this Bern exhibition, and these were very fine pieces, all gold. Now we do have many Henrys. We will start to see a lot of Henry Montandons. Now, Henry Montandon Besançon, this is a very interesting character. He was an immigrant to France from Switzerland, and he is Henri Louis Montandon, and he was an inventor. He has approximately 7 patents to his name, and these patents are all retained by the patent authority in France, and these are very interesting. But he was very well looked upon in Besançon. He was the most prolific patent filer as far as watchmakers in the city of Besançon. That he has a very much glory behind his name. It revolves around the improvement of horological science and these patented ideas that he came up with. So now I would like to look at this Cercle et Montandon partnership. This is also located in Besançon. We have approximately 42 objects that were fabricated, and we know the dates and the serial numbers. They were fabricated for this partnership. This was a partnership by Louis Cercle, who was a traveling salesman, and Charles Auguste Montandon, clerk, who was the brains behind the watchmaking. And these watches were all submitted to the Besançon Observatory, and these were over 90% of these received a bulletin de marche, and this would have increased the value of these watches. However, these watches, it is not exactly clear how they were signed. Therefore, the Cercle et Montandon Besançon, this is in gray because this is suspected, the signature, but we simply do not know because we have not seen any of these watches. And this would have been the tip of the iceberg. They would have produced many, many more objects. These would have been the elite pieces of their fabrication. But once again, this was only Charles Montandon that was making the watches. But I would like to go through briefly the rest of this list. Returning to Henry Montandon, we have this H. Montandon, sometimes H.I. or H.R.I. And we do have La Chaux de Fonds, 3 objects by Henry Montandon. This is a different Montandon Henry than of Locle. This La Chaux de Fonds Henry was the son of Louis Auguste, and he is probably departing the watch scene a decade before H. Montandon Locle, so we certainly know that there's a difference. And the reason for his signing of La Chaux de Fonds, once again, would have denoted his physical presence in the area. These signatures, as far as Locle, Geneva, these can be somewhat not exactly clear. In general, this was a way to sell the watches because the city denoted the quality, and this would have been a very high call to quality to the customer, and therefore, if you are fabricating in a small village, you may indeed put Locle. Now, Henry's identity. There are many candidates for Henry Montandon, H. Montandon, Locle. There are several that are more prominent than the others. However, and this is a very interesting maker. These watches are only gold watches, and he has a huge production. We see that these watches, certainly after 1850, but in generally between the 1860 to 1890 period. So we do have over 50 objects, and the serial number ranges are between, and we can see this starting in the very low. There's H. Montandon Locle with 5,103. This is a small lady's watch suspected gold, only the movement exists. When the movement exists only on its own, generally this is a sign that the gold has departed the scene, it has been cannibalized, and the movement is the only thing that is left. But there are no silver H. Montandon Locla pieces in existence. So there is one movement that is in a silver clock piece, so but this has a 22 karat gold as well. However, all others are, these are all golden pocket watches. So this appears to be a very successful, very large scale, large amount of watches produced, and we see that the serial number is going up into the 139,000. So between this low number to all the way up to 140,000. This is a huge production. Now there are also Henry Montandon Loclas. This is not clear whether this is different than H. Montandon Locla. These may be the same maker, but we don't have enough evidence. But the Henry Montandon pieces do appear to be much later, certainly after 1880, but more closer to the 1890s to 1900 period. And so this is likely a different maker. And then we also have H. Montandon and Henry Montandon Geneva. And these probably fit with this Henry Montandon Locla. This is suspected to be the same fabricator, but once again, not exactly clear. However, you must remember H. Montandon Locla, these are only gold pieces. And Henry Montandon Locla does include silver pieces. Now, so we do have these factors. Now we do have a very few A Montandon Loclas. And this is probably August Montandon. Now, August Montandon was associated with Montandon frères, much like Jules Montandon and J. Montandon most certainly was. And there are only two August Montandon signed pieces. One is Locla and another is Geneva. So we do have this very small amount of watches. And it is probably, this is probably the same individual. We do have this August Montandon that was on Rue de la Côte with Montandon frères, and after the breakup of, or the liquidation of the company, we do find him in La Chaux-de-Fonds. And then we have a very elite group of Eugene Montandon, Eugène Montandon Locla pieces, and these are all Locla signed. However, this Eugène was in Locla and later moved by 1880 to La Chaux-de-Fonds. And these pieces do appear to be in this 1880 to 1890 period. So this is, we also see very small numbers here. These are generally under 1,000. The only known intact watch, and these are all gold pieces also, the only intact watch is this 1666 serial number piece, and the others are all movements. They have, the gold has departed. However, we can be fairly certain that these are golden watches. The hands of these pieces are generally gold and often encrusted with gemstones. So this is really a small niche producer, and we're fairly certain about the man behind this. This was a specialist in La Chaux-de-Fonds. Now we come up upon other very interesting watchmakers, such as Frédéric Montandon, and we see, like Eugene, where he is sometimes Eugene is sometimes abbreviating ENE or Euge, EUG. When the watch form factor is small, we do have Frédéric with abbreviations of Fique, Frique, and etc. Now, or generally it's F. Montandon Locla, but these are almost always Locla. There are some Geneva pieces, and these most likely can be associated with the same maker, and this is the mid-1860s to the mid-1870s. Now, he was fabricating up until the early 1890s. I believe he died in 1892, and this is the cousin of Charles Auguste Montandon Clerc, who was in Besançon. This is Frédéric Montandon of Neuchâtel city, and he was signing, interestingly, Locla. But there is one piece which is signed, this is only a movement, is a Lapine caliber 5, signed Fritz Montandon Locla. Now, Fritz Montandon is a different individual. We have two Fritzes, and one of them was the brother of Ulysse Montandon Robert, a chronometer champion who established himself in Geneva. So this is probably his brother, but this is certainly different than Frédéric or Fique Montandon, which was Frédéric Montandon Clerc. So, and now we have this interesting Montandon and Co. Genevas. And this is a partnership, but we do not know precisely who was behind this. It is very likely that this was the first brand that Henri-Louis Montandon of Besançon did, and he had this for almost 10 years, up until around 1859, when the partnership was basically liquidated. And this is very, very probable that this was him and his partners. But we cannot rule out other options, such as some of the La Chaux-de-Fonds Montandon fabricators. And now we have we start to get into some of the most mysterious watch assignations, and this is Montandon and Locle. Now, generally these pieces are pieces by Montandon Frères Locle, I believe. Now, if you are a smaller Montandon watch fabricator, this is a very broad category, and most definitely a lot of the smaller fabricators would have been competing under this very generic name. And we see that there are a lot of these, but Montandon Locle was a became a patented name by Charles Albert Montandon, the last Montandon Frères managing director. And we do find this in the early 1880s. However, prior to that, it's not exactly clear. However, this could have been smaller Montandon watch fabricators around Neuchâtel. But and the same applies with Montandon Geneva. Some of these are probably are Saint-Croix. This is the house of Hugh Montandon, Ulysse. This was a family, a father and a son, and his sons actually. But very likely that this is them. And but once again, this can be left open because of the amount of information that we have. But it's very good that we have these datings and the serialization for further study. This may become more precise in the future. And we do have Charles Albert Montandon Locle. We know this is a watch. This would have been a very elite watch, much like Charles Adolphe Montandon piece. However, this was probably the son, Charles Albert Montandon, and we know this relates to Montandon Frères because their Poinçon, which was registered in 1883, is in the watch case. So this is certainly their piece. But this is interesting because we also have the serial number for this piece, and it is significantly higher than the other Montandon Frères pieces of this time. Now, the next, and we have a lot of these watches, the next fabricator, we have this Albert Montandon Geneva, and this ran for a significant period between the 1860s and 1890s. Now, it is most likely that this was not a Montandon watch fabricator. This was a name that was basically patented as a type of a watch product category, if you will, by another company, which was the widow John Magnan and Guyanan company that was in Geneva, and they also later moved into New York. But this was a company that was operated by James Courvoisier, and so this was one of the brands that he owned the name to. And this, once again, is not exactly clear. Did one of his in-laws fabricate for them with this name? Because he was indeed married to a Montandon, and it's very possible that a relative of some of hers did find his way into this collaboration and was part of this watch fabricator. Not exactly clear, but we do know that it is related to that company. And now we have these Montandon et Montandon Birmingham pieces. This was Albert Montandon, and this is a different Albert Montandon. This was a Jules Albert. He went by Albert, and his partner Montjon, and this is Edward Montjon. And we find them throughout the 1880s. And by 1889, the partnership was dissolved, and Albert went back to Switzerland. They had been in London during this time, but Albert did have a factory in Switzerland, in La Chaux-de-Fonds, that was producing these pieces for the English market. And now later, Albert Montandon was probably fabricating watches under Montandon Locla or something of this variety. And that we do have a lot of very high quality chronometer stopwatches and things of this variety that may have been behind his fabrication. But he was in the watch business up until about 1900. So this last decade, he was probably making very high quality Montandon Geneva or Montandon Locla pieces. And now we have Jacquard et Montandon, Genève. This most certainly Samuel Jacquard and Eulis Montandon, and this would have been, by this time, it's very possible this is either the father or the son, because they had both had Eulis in their name. One was Charles Eulis and the other was Edward Eulis. However, they both continued under this Eulis brand, which is very interesting. And Eulis Edward, he died approximately 1889, and the company U Montandon Locla, or excuse me, U Montandon Saint Croix was basically sold off. But his brother Emile had been working with them, and he had perfected a telemeter. This was a telemetre Montandon. We also find a chronoscope telemetre Montandon, and this was supposedly patented and was also sold to Germany, to Krupp and other large firms. Very, very interesting, very successful. It received very high praise in the artillery reviews of the Swiss Army, and this piece was purchased and even featured in the military presses of the European countries, across the continent. These pieces were very in focus by the top militaries. This was a very high precision piece. It could detect, this is for artillery fire, and there was also a doctor's watch component in this as well. But very, very interesting story. And now we have U Montandon Robert, and this is Eulis Montandon Robert, and he began fabricating in Les Ponts de Martel, but at some point we find him already opened in business, certainly by around 1892, 1893 in Geneva. And this was under his own steam. He was probably with his father, which was Samuel Henry of Les Ponts, and his brothers. They were all watch fabricators. He was probably in Les Ponts earlier, and then at some point, we're not exactly sure when, he actually moved to Geneva. But once again, he also may have been involved with the house of U Montandon of Saint Croix. This is also very close by, and it's very possible that he would have been helping his cousins. These were very close cousins. But I would just like to finish briefly with this A Montandon, which are either Swiss or Switzerland. And these are movements in general. However, they were making watches, but this was a very interesting. This was our last major fabricator, and he was in La Chaux-de-Fonds. And this is a Montandon Bandelier, and this was, and we have another watch fabricator, Alphonse. This is Alphonse Montandon Bandelier, and he was fabricating up until the Great Depression, basically. And his son Leopold took over the business and liquidated around by 1835. And then we see Arnold Montandon La Chaux-de-Fonds, and he was making generally cases for watches and straps and things of this variety. But we do find some of his casing, as this single piece has materialized with this La Chaux-de-Fonds in his Ponceau. But this is a list of catalog of Montandon watch pieces, 511 objects. This is the largest catalog of these makers in existence, and I hope this resource is useful for enthusiasts and those who study the art of horology, in specific Swiss watchmaking and its history. So please provide any feedback. I would be very honored to receive your questions, and I appreciate if you've stayed this long to watch this video. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very pleasant evening and weekend. Bye-bye.